Well, Kayden, thank you for joining today to have this conversation and to share a little bit about your experiences. To talk today about sort of the Safe Havens update and your experiences in systems. And so I wonder if first you could just tell us a little bit about who you are to better understand you.
So I am a trans youth, I guess, still almost 20, from Texas. I grew up in a small conservative town, and I ended up in foster care when I was a teenager. Moved around a lot, did a lot of things. I really like politics. I'm going to school to be a paralegal. That's something I'm really interested in. I also really love reading and doing research and learning about new things as well. I say I'm a gender fluid trans masc demi boy. So my gender flows, but only on the male side of the gender spectrum. So only from like fully masculine to agender and in that side of the spectrum. I'm also a biromantic asexual. So I date whoever. I really don't have a huge preference, but I am asexual, so I don't feel sexual attraction. I have had experience with the foster care system, and also the mental health system in Texas.
Did anyone offer services or support to help your family in accepting your identity? And would you have been open to receiving those services?
I definitely would have been open to receiving them if they were there at all, but they were not.
Right.
Especially when foster care like got into everything and got into my family. Their main thing was your life is not in current life or death danger.
Mm.
And because your parents have money, they're able to take care of you. I had heard of things online and through YouTube and stuff, but around the time I was coming out was like 2016, 2017,
Mhm.
when the political stuff started to get a lot. So a lot of the federal help that I would have been able to try to get, I
Right.
wasn't able to because of who the president was at the time and all the political shenanigans happening. And I grew up in a small conservative town, so
So let's talk a little bit about affirmation then. Did people have conversations with you about your identity? And if so, how was it handled?
while
Mhm.
in CPS, I tried to bring it up, and they kind of brushed it under the rug. They were like, "Oh, you're a tomboy, okay," and like that was it. It was never really talked about. Um, at most placements, some placements were more accepting. So like placements in cities tended to be a little more accepting, at least.
Sure.
Especially Austin. Austin was probably the most accepting city I've been in.
What did people do to affirm your identity?
The placements I did have for my identity, one of them was split between boys and girls. And so before I even got there, they called my caseworker, asked my caseworker my pronouns, if I wanted to be on the boys or girls side, and also which bathroom I preferred using. And so that was really cool. I was able to use what I felt comfortable with. They referred to me as Kayden. They didn't know if my caseworker was accepting at the time. So when I first got there at like midnight, the staff made sure to like pull me in without my caseworker and was like, "Hey, what are your pronouns? Hey, like, do you feel comfortable with your caseworker knowing any of this? Like, what are we gonna do here?" And so that was really good to know that they cared about my thoughts and what I felt was safe for me.
How has other aspects of your identity, so racial, cultural, religious, and others, impacted your gender identity?
So I grew up Methodist, which is a Christian denomination. And there were people within my church who had said, "We're always accepting, we're always going to accept people, we accept LGBTQ people." But there were also people in my church who said that they weren't accepting, who said that LGBTQ people shouldn't be Christians. So it was kind of split. And especially in my home, it was more of we're okay with it as long as we don't do it. And so that's what my family gave off. So they were like, we're okay with gay people. We're friends with gay people. We get along with gay people. But we ourselves cannot be that way. And
Right.
it wasn't like a religious thing for my family for their
Mhm.
reasoning for that, but that was just what they believed. That's just what they thought. They were like, "We're okay with gay people, but one of us cannot be gay." My church especially was like, "We don't judge what others do, but we'll judge
Mhm.
what we do."
Right.
Which sounds great, except when it comes to like being gay or something or being trans.
Right.
And it's like, we don't care if they're gay or trans, but if
Right.
one of ours are, no, we have to set that straight. We have to make sure they know that that isn't something that we should be doing.
Right.
And so that was another thing that was very irritating because I was very accepting of all people. I was like, yeah, I'm accepting of everyone. I don't care. And it started to become a problem for me because I was questioning why I could be so accepting of others,
Mhm.
but I couldn't be accepting of myself with that identity. And it
Right.
really like came to a head for me when I was like 13, 14, and I was like, I don't like this.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about autonomy and agency. Have you been asked what you want and need to feel supported in your identity?
Not much. More so when I was around 17, almost 18. So before CPS, not at all. I had no autonomy whatsoever. While in CPS, there were some things like I could dress how I wanted to. Um, I wasn't allowed to go by any other names. I wasn't allowed to go by any other pronouns. I wasn't allowed to say I was trans or anything like that in many placements. Around the time I was almost 17, I moved to a placement near Corpus Christi and they let me use Kayden as a name.
Mhm.
Um, we kind of went with it's my nickname. That's when I started going by Kayden, but many placements still use she, her pronouns around me. And with me because that's what CPS was using. So they're like, well, because this is your government gender and this is what CPS is using, this is what we have to use, but we'll definitely call you Kayden.
Right.
And then finally, when I moved to Austin, there were that one placement that I went to in Austin, they were like, no, we're going to listen to you. You're in charge of your life. You're almost an adult.
Mhm.
And they would argue with CPS sometimes, especially with me,
Right.
because they were like, you need to be able to do what you want to do. And CPS was like, but they're a minor. They're 17. They can't do
Right.
what they want to do. And it wasn't anything like outrageous. Like it
Right.
wasn't like me deciding to live on my own or anything.
Right.
But certain things, like I wasn't allowed to go out and do things really until I was like 17 and at a placement where they allowed me to do that.
Right.
Most placements I were at wouldn't even allow me to own my own pens,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
writing pens. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
own. It was a relief when I got to that
Mhm.
placement because it was totally different. I had never experienced that much freedom.
Also related to autonomy and agency, if you socially or medically transitioned, were you allowed to take the lead in that process, or did adults in your life make assumptions about what your transition would look like?
So it's a little bit of both. I started socially transitioning with myself, like personally, around 14, 15.
Okay.
But nobody else would recognize it. So like I
Mm.
presented as a guy. I said I was a guy, but no one else would try to. They were like, no, no, that's not no. So I started. So when it became like when people were realizing that I was socially transitioning, I was probably
Mhm.
um almost 17, 17, almost 17 around that time.
Yeah.
Um, when people started to realize, oh, you're actually presenting that way. Okay. And then I started medically transitioning with testosterone 2 months before my 18th birthday.
Okay.
We had started the process about 6 months before my 18th birthday, but
Mhm.
CPS kind of blocked that because they said it was experimental and they didn't have policy on it, and it was a whole thing. It became a whole ordeal because at the beginning they were like, "Yeah, that sounds fine," and then
Right.
my CASA, who is my guardian ad litem in Texas, they're the ones who
Mhm.
become your guardian ad litems.
Mhm.
She was like, I don't think that's right. I don't think you should make a life-changing choice at 17.
Mm.
And so she like called CPS and was like, "Do y'all really have the authority to say yes or no to this? Shouldn't this
Right.
be brought up in court?" But we finally were able to get it approved after many caseworkers quitting
Yeah.
and leaving.
Yeah.
Finally, after I even contacted Lambda Legal to be like, "Hey, I think I'm being discriminated against because
Right.
this should not be happening. Like they don't have any policy saying it's against the rules, and now they're trying to say it's experimental when it's clearly not. What's up?"
Right.
And then they finally were like, finally, after a bunch of people quit, they got to like the regional director, and the regional director was like, "Why hasn't this been started? Like they have a
Right.
psychiatrist note, they have a therapist note, they
Right.
have lawyers that they have contacted. Like,
Right.
why are y'all not allowing this?" So I was finally able to start, and that was really cool.
Let's talk about safety a little bit. So, during your experience in care in the system, however you like to think about it, were there people you felt like you could trust?
Mostly just myself. There were a few people at like some placements that I knew I could, but it was very much like they weren't able to openly show that I could
Mhm.
trust them. And so it kind of became a secretive thing. Like the really good staff, when they're at bad placements,
Mhm.
they have to like hide a lot of the time that they care about you and that they want to help you.
Mhm.
And that was something that happened many times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could barely really trust anyone. I was at a Christian RTC, which is a
Mhm.
residential treatment center.
Okay.
And one staff, they had told all the staff that they could not use any pronouns but she, her for me. And
Mhm.
so what one staff did, they also couldn't use Kayden as my name. They had to use my government name. And so
Mhm.
one thing that they did is when they would write on the board our weekly chores and stuff, instead of putting my full government name, they just put the letter K. And then also they wouldn't use any pronouns when referring to me. They would
Mm.
just be like, K said this or K did that, and that was it. And whenever someone
Okay.
asked them about it, they were like, "Well, that's their nickname. It's short for their government name."
Were there places that you felt safe? So not just in the people, but were there physical places that you felt safe or groups?
When I moved to Austin, Austin was really the first city with placements that I felt safe at. Because even when I left the placement, I knew it was a really accepting city. And I knew
Mhm.
like if I wanted to go to the men's bathroom while out in the town, I could.
Right.
And nobody would look at me weird or like say something to me. It was just accepted. They also have
Right.
gender neutral bathrooms in Austin
Mhm.
because when our state tried to do bathroom bans, the city was like, no. So now almost all Austin businesses have a gender neutral bathroom that anyone
Mm.
can use, which is really
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
But it's a really accepting city. It's really great. There most placements in Texas are like in the smaller towns. There are some city ones,
Mhm.
but most of them are not that good.
Right.
So not many, but like certain cities are more accepting than others.
Right.
So you can sometimes find the acceptance outside of the placements and like when you're going outside into the city or something.
Were there places that you felt you could be fully authentic?
Not really, because most placements you're under constant supervision and you're not able to
Mm.
like go without staff.
Right.
Um, and so when I the placement I was at in Austin, it was an emergency shelter. We
Mhm.
were able to go out without staff that time, so like I could go to downtown Austin and be my
Right.
authentic self there. But I was also able to be my authentic self in the placement. Most of the time, no, because you're always under constant supervision of
Okay.
some sort of staff.
What might be a few recommendations you have for the system to support trans, non-binary, and gender diverse young people in systems of care?
Definitely the first thing is training. They need to
Mhm.
be training on LGBTQ youth. They need to do it.
Mhm.
Another thing is for religious placements. They need to set stricter guidelines on what the religious placements can impose on the youth and what they cannot, because we're supposed to have our freedom of religion. But
Mm.
sometimes you're at a placement where they have Christian church and no other form of religious expression. And if you try to reach out sometimes for other forms, they're like, you can't do that or that's not allowed.
Right.
So very much have some more strict rules on placements that are explicitly religious, if you even allow explicitly religious placements,
Mhm.
or at least find a way for youth who are religious to be able to go to those, but youth that are not religious to not have to be forced to go to those placements. And another thing, I think, policy, have something in policy on LGBTQ youth,
Mhm.
um, so that when caseworkers are like, I have this situation with this youth, I don't know what to do, they can go and look at a policy that says, here's what you should be doing. Here are the things to help this youth. And here are things you should talk to this youth about. Because there's no policy. Policy wise in Texas, there is nothing on LGBTQ youth. And so when caseworkers run into these problems, they
Right.
don't know what to do.
Right.
If the placement you're working at, for staff especially, if they're forcing you to like use someone's government or dead name or whatever,
Mhm.
or wrong pronouns, I would say try to malicious compliance, I guess, is like
Mm.
do it, but in a way that doesn't hurt the youth,
Mhm.
and doesn't get you in trouble. Because you don't want to always necessarily be in trouble because um like it's losing a good staff,
Mhm.
someone that actually cares about the youth. So do it in a way that's like, okay, if I can't use their preferred pronouns, I just won't use any pronouns. Or if I can't use the name they want to go by, I'll just use a nickname that's in between these two, or like a
Mhm.
letter name, or like something else. So the kid can tell that you're a safe person, even though they're in a unsafe environment.
Was there any organizations that you worked with, or were you referred to services that were affirming? And if so, how were they affirming?
One of them was called LifeWorks in Austin. It
Mhm.
was an emergency shelter. And they're the ones that asked questions before I got there, like what I preferred to go by, what were my pronouns, what side do I want to be, on the boy side or the girl side.
Right.
So that was something really great they did, is before the kid got there, they wanted to get to know them more so that they were prepared for when the kid arrived.
Mhm.
Another really good one is Safe. I'm currently there for extended care.
Mhm.
They do a lot of things with the city of Austin too. So they're not just CPS stuff. They
Right.
do a lot of like homeless stuff. They have a warehouse where they give out stuff for families in need, things like that. They're very accepting. I've even talked to staff multiple times and they said, they're not going to let CPS run over these kids.
Right.
And if these kids are having issues with CPS, they're going to try and help the kid before they even try to help CPS. And
Right.
so things like that, like where the staff put the kids before they put CPS. Because a lot of placements are like, well, we don't want to lose CPS licensing. And
Mhm.
so we're going to listen to CPS. It's like, great, listen to CPS, but also make sure that the kid is who you're focusing on because
Right.
it's a child.
Did you experience any organizations that claimed to be affirming, but in practice were not? And if so, how so?
The way it usually is that almost all of these was the higher ups said they were affirming. So
Mhm.
whenever they like did outreach and stuff, they're like, we're affirming. Um, the higher levels were like, we're affirming. But when it got down to lower levels, a lot of these are like community based and volunteer based. And they weren't doing like trainings for these volunteers in a way that was telling these volunteers, like, you may have your beliefs, but you need to put the kids like
Right.
rights and the kid before your beliefs. And
Right.
so there were a lot of volunteers that were like, I don't think this is right for you. I don't think you should be doing this. I don't know if this is correct. Like, I had one person tell me if I became a boy that I wasn't a feminist anymore, that I couldn't be a feminist. I was like, okay, cool. I guess women are only feminists.
Yeah,
Nice. We're just gonna forget this whole, what, 15 years that I was living as a female? Cool, cool, yeah. That's a
right.
fun one.
Yeah. If there's anything else you'd want folks to know that you'd want to share about yourself, your experiences, or ways they can better support LGBTQ young people before we close up.
I think something people should know and a way to help support LGBTQ youth, especially in foster care, because that's really one of the only things I have experience with,
Hmm.
is when you're interacting with CPS or DFPS, which is Texas's CPS main thing.
Hmm.
When you're interacting with them and companies that work with them and work with foster youth, look to see exactly what their beliefs are, things like that. If it's a Christian based organization, make sure, like, before you donate to them, that they're actually going to be accepting of these youth. Do like small things that you can, um, especially when donating money and things. Make sure that they are there to support all youth, especially
Hmm.
LGBTQ youth, especially Black youth, especially youth of color, because these groups are highly represented in foster care, yet treated horribly by foster care and treated horribly by everyone. And like it's wrong. And a lot of these companies, say, well, we treat all youth the same, but they don't. And they
Hmm.
get all this money and they're not helping the youth with the money.